Biden takes a big swing on the world stage before turning to the midterms. The midterms may be closely approaching, but Joe Biden's focus, for the next week at least, will be firmly on matters overseas. The president returns to the international stage over the next few days to pay tribute to allies and exhort democracies, amid an audience where he arguably shines brighter than he does at home, before making that shift into a midterm political blitz. With the success of Ukraine's counteroffensive against Russia providing an inspiring backdrop, Biden will take his case to the United Nations next week, urging for the world to rebel against Vladimir Putin's unprovoked war. And before that, he heads to the United Kingdom for the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. He will pay tribute to the long-reigning monarch who, as a teenage princess in World War II, did her own part to stand up to a dictator. Biden will then largely set aside diplomacy for a 6-week barrage of domestic campaigning. But White House aides believe that the pair of consequential gatherings before then, in two world capitals, London and then New York, will provide the president with a welcoming stage. He will use it, aides said, to push back against autocratic forces threatening the globe. Some of that will be aimed at Beijing, much of it at Moscow. And with the eyes of the world upon him, Biden will utilize his UN speech to urge support for the ragtag group of fighters, reinforced with Western weapons, who are putting up stunning victories against a much larger war machine. There's a sense of momentum here by the Ukrainian armed forces, said John Kirby, coordinator for strategic communications at the National Security Council. There's a sense of momentum here by the Ukrainian armed forces. There will be no overt politicking at what will likely be one of the grandest funerals the world has ever seen. Biden and First Lady Jill Biden were set to board Air Force One on Saturday for the flight to London, 2 days ahead of the funeral for the Queen. Elizabeth, as a princess, worked as a mechanic in the war effort against Adolf Hitler's Germany and, after becoming queen, presided over a nation that has remained a bulwark for democracy. The monumental funeral will draw leaders from around the world, many leaving behind their entourages in luxury vehicles for a day to pay their respects. Putin will not be there. But Biden, who met the Queen last summer, will be among the mourners. Aides plan for him to have at least some informal time with a number of allies, including Britain's new Prime Minister Liz Truss, who came to power only days before the Queen's death. But in London, any conversations about the war a few thousand miles to the east will be whispered. In New York a few days later, it will be center stage. Biden's address to the UN General Assembly was postponed 1 day due to the funeral, with the president now set to take the stage on Wednesday. Aides have worked for weeks on the speech. They view it as the latest in a series of high-profile opportunities for Biden to place the battle in Ukraine into his larger view that the next century will be defined by the battle between democracies and autocracies. The first opportunity was at the State of the Union, delivered just days after Russia's February invasion. That was followed by a pair of summits in Europe, in Poland in March, Spain in June, in which Biden tried to hold his coalition together. And now this speech at the United Nations, its first full-fledged General Assembly since before the COVID pandemic, comes at a particularly consequential moment in the war. Biden's support for Ukraine has not wavered even as Russia marked the spring with grinding, but steady progress in the nation's east. Now, momentum appears to lie with Ukraine, which improved cooperation and intelligence sharing with the United States in recent weeks to launch a two-pronged counteroffensive that took Moscow by surprise. But U.S. military officials have cautioned that it was too premature to celebrate, warning that Russia was still well fortified in much of the region and could soon regroup.